everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be talking about The Brunswick by Callie Murray. So, this one, it's a historical romance and it's set during World War II and it fits within the Christian fiction category and it's a standalone story. So, why did I want to read this one? Well, I looked at the premise for the story. It's set in Europe as well as the USA just before World War II starts, and I thought this looks like a really interesting book. So that's why I picked it up. And I'm going to add my usual disclaimer and say many thanks to the publisher who provided an advanced reader copy, and all the opinions that I express in this episode are completely my own. Now, I'm very excited because I have a giveaway to share with you. So one reader will win a copy, a paperback, and that's for a reader with a USA mailing address. And at the end of the episode, I'll provide more details on the giveaway. So let's talk about the book. The Brunswick by Callie Murray is set in Europe and also in America. So the main story is set in Georgia, in a small town not far from Atlanta. And there's also a subplot that's set in Vienna, in Austria as well. So there's quite a few romance tropes in this one, being a historical romance. So we have a delightful friends to more romance, and we have forced proximity because our main characters are working together. We're in a small town in the south, and it's 1939, so it's just before World War II is declared in Europe. So it's a wartime romance, and being that setting, we also have danger. We have some political intrigue with a mystery in the story. We have family drama and secrets that have big consequences if they're revealed. We have some situations in the story that are actually drawn on events that have happened in real life, and the author's note goes into more details on that. And the story really doesn't sugarcoat the hardships of war, and we have grief and loss, and there is death in this book as well because it's a war story. So if grief and loss is a trigger for you, this might be one to read later rather than now. The story also includes foster families and found family themes with the foster care system that was happening back then with refugee children. And we also have adoption in the story as well. So there's a lot of things going on. So I'm going to share the first line with you. And this is from the prologue. So the prologue's a little bit before chapter one. We're in November 1938 in Vienna in Austria, or in just outside Vienna. Papa was always quick to run after Charlotte when he returned home from work, quick to call her name. So this introduces us to Charlotte. So she's 10 years old and she's a Jewish girl who's born and raised in Austria, just outside of Vienna. So this is the subplots is what's kicking off the story. And at the beginning, when we meet Charlotte, she's living on a farm. Her parents own a business, a butcher's stall as well. And they also have the trees on the farm and the things that they're growing there as well. And what happens is that the government comes and takes control of the farm and of the business, and they arrest her father. So he's taken off somewhere unknown at the beginning of the story. So they basically, Charlotte and her mother have to leave the farm because they've lost their home, and they go to the city. So they go to Vienna to an apartment where her aunt lives, and end up staying in this very crowded apartment full of Jewish people that are hiding from the government because of the persecution that is going on, which is what leads into what happens with World War II. So it's quite a heartbreaking beginning to the story because it's quite confronting, I think, to read these things and to look at how little control that the people actually had. If the government wanted to do something, the government just did it. There was no way to appeal or anything like that. So it was a really harsh environment that Charlotte finds herself in at the start of the story. So this we'll move forward to chapter one. So we're moving to April 1939 and we're in a small town in Georgia. And this particular town's on the railway line from Atlanta that heads up the East Coast. And I'll introduce you to Cora. So she's our leading lady. She's in her early 20s. And at the Brunswick, where she lives, she runs the general store there. So the Brunswick was a beautiful, prosperous hotel back from the roaring 20s. And everything was fine until we hit the Depression. And the fortunes of the family went down, 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 as there was no money for people to pay and to stay at nice hotels during the Depression. And so her family has accrued a lot of debts. Hence, that's why Cora has opened this general store. So she's working very hard there to repay the debts and to try and have enough money to pay for her and her father. And her father's a war hero who's in a really deep depression and has a lot of mental health issues that he's struggling with. And Cora's also dealing with abandonment issues. Her mother left her and her father when she was a teenager, and that's caused a lot of trouble and angst and issues for Cora as well. So I'm going to introduce you to Thomas. So he's our hero. He's in his early 20s, like Cora, and he's halfway through a medical degree in Chicago. And he was effectively forced to leave. And one of the secrets he's carrying in the story is why he was forced to leave. So he's arrived in town. He's new. His father and brothers came ahead of him. So they've been in Georgia a bit longer than he has. And their mother passed away very sadly when they were living in Chicago. So he's dealing with a lot of grief connected to losing his mother. So the meet cute between these two is quite awkward because Thomas turns up and wants a job, and Cora has no idea who he is. So, and she's been very self-sufficient, doing everything herself at the Brunswick as well. So it's a bit awkward when they first meet, but he needs a job. She really needs help because she's working herself to the bone and has a lot to do and a lot to try and manage and a lot of stress at the Brunswick. So he ends up working with her, is where we start this story. And the connection between Thomas and Cora is that Thomas's brother is dating Cora's best friend. So they end up in the same friendship group as well. So, in this story, as you can imagine, being a wartime story, there are a lot of problems, and the political environment creates a lot of problems for the characters. So, pretty much everyone in this story has a degree of emotional baggage. Some have more emotional baggage than others that they have to deal with. So, Cora, having been abandoned by her mother and having other things happen in her life, she really has a lot of trust issues, and she's really stressed out and struggling because her father's mental health is not great and he will just stay in bed all day. So she's really stressed out because she's trying to do all this work to get the Brunswick back on its feet, and he's basically not getting out of bed and leaving his room. So it's really hard for her. And Thomas, as I mentioned, is hiding secrets, and there are reasons for why he left Chicago and couldn't finish the medical degree that he was really enjoying doing and really wants to pursue. He wants to be a doctor, but all of that got stopped for reasons that were outside his control. And so we have a lovely friends to more romance in the story, but there's a lot of stress involved in that because of the political situation, and what's going on in Europe will actually impact the romance and impact the characters with this war that's brewing in Europe. And we also have some heartbreaking racial discrimination that happens in a few different places in the story. I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to give away spoilers, but the story really does look at the problems and issues of dealing with people that are holding some pretty big prejudices against other people according to their race, which is it's hard and heartbreaking to read. And we have side characters who live in town who are Jewish, who have a desire to rescue the children in Europe who are displaced because of what's going on in Austria and Germany with the government, and particularly the children who've had their parents taken away to the concentration camps and are effectively abandoned and need assistance. So we have refugee children that will be brought from Europe to America in the story. And the situation in Austria and Germany is very, very dangerous if you're a Jewish person as well, and very dangerous if you're on the wrong side of government policy. So that also comes into play during the story as well. We have that international aspect. So I really enjoyed this book. It was a deep read. It was beautifully written. It was a hard read because of the wartime setting, and you can't avoid death. You can't avoid grief. You can't avoid dealing with those really hard issues when there's a war brewing and a war about to start. And when you've got a political regime that's persecuting people, and it's just awful. It's hard to read, but at the same time, these types of books are important to read because if we forget our history and forget what happens in the past, then we can't learn for the future and not make the same mistakes that have happened in the past. And so there was as well as having this lovely, sweet friends to more romance, there was a lot of pain and suffering and hardship and heartbreak that was happening in the story. And I really loved the small town in Georgia. It was very true to life. So we have a whole lot of characters that really do pull together to help because the Brunswick becomes a base where they're planning to bring the children to then rehome them and adopt them out and reunite them with their parents and loved ones from Europe, etc., etc. So that plays a role in the story. But we also had characters in town who didn't want any of this to happen and had their own prejudices. So it wasn't all rosy and easy to actually make this refugee children situation happen and to bring these children to America. And the political instability with the war brewing in Europe was hard to read. It really was. And it really did create a lot of problems what was happening to a number of characters in the book. And Charlotte's journey in particular, it was bittersweet. There was some joy in the suffering that she was dealing with. There were some moments that were really sweet, but at the same time it was heartbreaking how she was separated from parents for different reasons at different times. And there was pretty much family drama, irrespective of what family you were looking at. And I think that's just the nature of what war will do is that people will have loved ones going off to war and going off into dangerous places. They don't know whether they're going to return. They don't know if they're going to get injured. There's a lot of a lot of depth and a lot of pain and a lot of heartbreak that goes with a war novel. And we see all of that on the page in this beautiful book. So I'm going to share my favorite book quote with you, which is this one. But if life were about love, they could find victory, even in the worst of times. Even grief was a testament to love. And the story did have a lovely message of hope and love and how love can overcome a lot. And we have characters that are in life-threatening and dire situations in the story where they're feeling hopeless. They have no control over what's happening to them in their lives, which is incredibly scary. There are some pretty big consequences depending on where you sit on the political spectrum with what's going on with the situation in Europe as well. And a lot of the characters, all they could do was hold on to faith and hold on to the faith they have because they had no idea what their future was going to look like because they had no control over what was happening to them as well. So this one I would describe as having relevant faith elements that are quite light on the page, but are very organic to the story. So as I said, the characters will need to draw on their faith at different times because that's pretty much all they have left is their faith in some of the situations that we're in with the danger and being so afraid of what was going to happen in the future. And we have characters that had some really heartbreaking struggles with grief and loss and abandonment and all of that kind of thing in the story as well, that had some pretty big consequences for other characters, not just themselves. And the war setting with the life and death situations, it draws out all of those sort of deep thinking issues, and grief is something you can't avoid in these situations. And the persecution of the Jewish people, it wasn't just hard for the people that were being persecuted, it was also hard for everybody else in terms of what was going on and how they should respond to the persecution that was happening as well. And I loved how the Americans in the story saw what was going on in Europe and thought, I can do something to make a difference. There's these visas that we can use to bring these children here and to actually bring them away from danger and give them an opportunity to have a better life than, for example, where Charlotte was stuck in this apartment hiding because if she happened to look the wrong way on the street and catch the eye of one of the soldiers on the street, she could be in a lot of trouble and her life could be in danger. So there was a lot going on for a lot of the characters in this book. So in terms of the impact on me, there were some very light-hearted moments amidst the harder things to read. And so there were lots of smiles, particularly with the romance, because Cora and Thomas's romance was just delightful to read. And I love watching them transition from being friends to more than friends. And at the same time, there was some poignant moments that were really tough and hard to read because the issues that were being dealt with were big issues. They weren't minor misunderstandings by any stretch of the imagination. And the story made me think about a whole lot of stuff, and particularly what was going on in Austria and Germany with the politics in the pre-World War II situation, and also how that translated to what was going on in America as well at the same time, because it was such a fraught and stressful time for everybody in the world, not quite sure, are we going to end up in another war? And of course, in hindsight, we can look back and we know that war was imminent, but when they're living their lives, they're not quite sure where things are going to land and what's going to happen. And the horrors of what was going on in Austria and Germany, it cannot be understated as to just how horrendous and horrible and difficult and dangerous. And it was, yeah, there was a lot going on in this book for sure. So, in summary, I would recommend The Brunswick to readers who like World War II romances with friends to more as the main romance trope, to readers who like the romance characters to have forced proximity and to have them working together, to readers who like small town romances with family drama, and also foster care, adoption, and found family themes in the story. I also recommend this book to readers that like international political intrigue and a mystery in the story that's quite unexpected in how it pops up as well. And to readers who like their wartime romances to not sugarcoat the horrors of war and to have outcomes that you can hope for something to be one way, but the outcome, because of the nature of war, is going to not necessarily be what you want. And to readers who like wartime romances with relevant faith elements that address trust issues. Thanks for joining me today. Does The Brunswick sound like a book that you'd like to read? Have you read it? What did you think? You can let me know. If you're listening at the podcast, you can send me a text via a link at the show notes. If you're watching at YouTube, you can like the episode at YouTube and leave a comment at YouTube. You can also email me at my website where I have a contact form at narelleatkins.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, and you can do that at your favorite podcasting app, or you can subscribe at YouTube, and then you'll get a notification on when my next episode drops. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share the link with a friend, especially a friend that enjoys reading wartime historical romance from a USA and international perspective that doesn't sugarcoat what's going on with the war, and also a friend who you think would enjoy reading Callie's lovely book. And the giveaway that I mentioned earlier. So I've got one paperback copy of The Brunswick for a reader that has a USA mailing address. Now, the giveaway will close on the 1st of July 2026, and that's USA West Coast time. And to enter the giveaway, there'll be a link in the show notes. So thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.